For decades, one room inside Windsor Castle remained untouched, a sacred space where Queen Elizabeth sought refuge from chaos. But behind closed doors, a dramatic renovation plan sparked fury. Sophie Wessex, silent for years, finally exploded, putting herself in direct opposition to Queen Camilla. Why this room? Why now? And what secret did it hold? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It wasn't just any room. Tucked away from the formal corridors and ceremonial halls, this space existed in near total secrecy, a small but emotionally loaded chamber where Queen Elizabeth would escape the weight of monarchy. It wasn't marked on tourist maps or ever used during public engagements. This was her haven, her inner sanctum. Inside, she reportedly kept only the most personal items: a framed photograph of Prince Philip from their early courtship, a worn Bible annotated in her own handwriting, and a set of naval insignias gifted by Philip himself. And it was here, according to long-serving palace aides, that the Queen had her final private conversation with him just days before his passing. It was, quite literally, the last place they had truly been alone. After Elizabeth's death, the room became something of a legend within the castle walls. While many spaces were restructured or slowly modernized under Charles's reign, this one remained locked, almost revered. Staff believed it was a silent tribute, a conscious decision by the king to leave it untouched. That belief shattered when quiet whispers of a renovation surfaced. Camilla, reportedly calling it unfit for the new era, proposed a complete transformation. Her team labelled it restoration, but it involved more than cleaning or upkeep. It included stripping out the original furniture, repainting, and replacing deeply personal elements with a contemporary aesthetic. The official justification was practical use, but beneath that surface was something colder: erasure. Sophie Wessex, who had been notably reserved since the Queen's passing, found out through an indirect source, a junior member of staff who expressed concern over what was about to happen. The news hit her like a betrayal. This wasn't just an old room. This was the soul of a woman who had once described Sophie as her second daughter. During Elizabeth's final years, it was Sophie who sat with her in that very room, sharing tea, listening, simply being there when others were too busy or too far removed by rank and expectation. The emotional weight of those moments wasn't something that could be understood by a decorator or accepted as collateral in Camilla's quest to redefine royal spaces. Construction notices had already gone out. Staff had been told to prepare for relocation. The wheels of change had begun to turn, and no one had anticipated Sophie would be the one to stop them, but she did. With quiet fury, she pushed back, refusing to let the Queen's most intimate corner become a symbol of post-Elizabeth revisionism. For Sophie, this was no longer about tradition or design. It was about dignity, memory, loyalty. She wasn't just protecting a room, she was protecting the last untouched remnant of a monarch who had reigned over a kingdom and kept her deepest emotions sealed behind that very door. But to understand Sophie's reaction, we need to uncover what this room meant to the Queen and why changing it was more than just poor taste. Few knew of its existence. Fewer were ever allowed inside. This was the Queen's haven, a room where she grieved, planned, and remembered. Within its walls were echoes of her love for Philip, her struggles with Charles, and her private battles. Camilla called it dated. Sophie called it sacred. The room was created in 1962 during a quieter period of Elizabeth's reign, when the world wasn't watching so closely, and she could afford a moment of reflection. It was built as a quiet tribute to Prince Philip's naval history, adorned not with grandeur but with personal mementos that only she and he would understand. A compass, gifted during their honeymoon. A wall-mounted replica of the Britannia's wheel. A mahogany desk where Elizabeth would write private letters, most of which were never sent. This wasn't a royal workspace. It was a time capsule of emotion, protected by silence and memory. After Philip's death, the room became a sanctuary of grief. According to one trusted aide, the Queen would disappear into it for hours, emerging only when her eyes were dry and her resolve restored. Among the most protected items was a hand-painted portrait, commissioned in secret, never made public. It showed Elizabeth and Philip in their garden, not as monarch and consort, but simply as two aging souls still tethered by love. It was one of the few things Elizabeth demanded be left exactly as it was, untouched, unshared, unseen. And then there were the letters, handwritten, folded neatly, stored in a locked box on the shelf. Some were notes from Philip, dated decades apart. Others were from Elizabeth herself, addressed to no one. She called them reflections. Sophie had read a few with permission, and she never spoke of them again. Sophie's connection to the room wasn't inherited. It was earned. During the Queen's final years, it became their shared space, a quiet escape from the noise of duty. Over cups of tea, Elizabeth had confided things to Sophie that had never been uttered in official records. Her fears about the future of the monarchy, her disappointment in certain choices made by Charles, her heartbreak over fractured bonds. Sophie listened, she never judged, and in those whispered moments, she became more than family. She became the keeper of Elizabeth's unspoken legacy. The Queen never left a written will regarding the room, but in conversation, she made it clear it should be preserved, just as it is. Camilla, however, saw the room through a different lens. To her, it was stagnant, a space out of touch with the monarchy's evolving identity. Unmodern, she called it. Stuck in time. She envisioned something brighter, bolder, more in line with her own sensibilities. But what she failed to understand, or perhaps chose not to, was that this room was never meant to evolve. It was meant to remain exactly as the Queen had left it, frozen in the only kind of time that mattered, emotional time. Camilla's plan wasn't simply a renovation, it was an erasure of something deeply personal, and Sophie knew it had to be stopped. Camilla's style is bold, her presence unmissable. But inside palace walls, her moves are strategic. Her desire to update the Queen's private room was part of a larger shift, redefining what the monarchy looks like under her and Charles. But in doing so, she made a critical mistake, underestimating Sophie. From the moment Queen Elizabeth II passed, subtle changes began rippling through Windsor Castle. Portraits shifted, layouts reimagined, titles redistributed with careful choreography. But beneath the surface was a far more radical transformation, one Camilla had been orchestrating quietly, steadily. As Queen Consort, her influence was growing, and with Charles's blessing, she saw it as her role not just to support the monarchy, but to rebrand it. Part of that involved reshaping the physical spaces of power. Rooms that once reflected a bygone era were earmarked for modernization. The language used was neutral, refreshing tradition, reimagining legacy. But those closest to the Queen's memory saw it for what it truly was, a quiet rewriting. The private room, once belonging to Queen Elizabeth, wasn't just another space, it was a symbol. And Camilla's decision to include it in the modernization plan came not out of malice, but from a calculated indifference. Her interior designer had already submitted mock-ups, soft tones replaced by bold palettes, intimate memorabilia replaced by modern art. The Queen's writing desk, one that had never moved since Philip's final days, was marked optional. Staff overheard Camilla refer to the space as sentimentality gone stale. In her view, the monarchy needed to shed its emotional weight to move forward. Nostalgia, while poetic, had no place in the rebranded firm she envisioned beside Charles. The king, ever pragmatic and focused on preserving equilibrium, approved the proposal with a shrug. To him, it was a room, one of many. Perhaps he believed it would go unnoticed. Perhaps he assumed no one cared deeply enough to object. But that assumption would cost them both, because someone did care more than anyone knew, and she had been watching in silence. Sophie learned of the renovation not through official channels, but through a whispered warning from a junior staffer who had stumbled upon the interior plans. What was meant to be a quiet operation behind closed doors suddenly ignited something dormant in her. The weight of loyalty, of memory, of quiet promises made over late-night conversations with the Queen, it all crashed into the present with unrelenting force. Sophie didn't just see Camilla's plan as tasteless. She saw it as a threat to the emotional DNA of the monarchy. There was no press coverage, no scandal, just a quiet, growing tension. One woman maneuvering through strategy and influence, the other moving with righteous purpose, ready to protect a piece of the past that no one else seemed willing to defend. And what neither had yet realized was that this conflict, small on the surface, was about to ripple into something much larger. And while Camilla played chess with power and perception, Sophie prepared for confrontation, one that would shake the halls of Windsor. There was no public showdown, no press release, just a closed door, two royal women, and a conversation that turned into a battlefield. Sophie didn't plead. She fought, and Camilla, used to deference, was stunned by what she heard. It began with a quiet request from Sophie, one that bypassed formal scheduling and skipped protocol entirely. It was direct, personal, urgent. The message made its way to Camilla with little context, but the Queen Consort accepted. Perhaps she assumed Sophie would simply express concern, perhaps even ask for a symbolic compromise. But the moment Sophie entered the room, it became clear this was no courtesy visit. Her voice, though calm, carried the sharp weight of conviction. She didn't circle the issue, she lunged straight for it. The private room, she said, should remain exactly as Elizabeth left it, not for nostalgia's sake, not for sentiment, but because it was the one space in the entire castle untouched by politics, optics, or legacy spin. It was a piece of truth, frozen in time. Camilla, taken off guard, replied curtly that it was just a room. A line that, perhaps in her mind, diffused the emotion behind it, but Sophie didn't flinch. Her response was immediate and firm. It's her room. That distinction cut deeper than Camilla expected. Sophie didn't need grand declarations. She needed only facts. She referenced moments shared in that very space, the Queen's spoken wishes to preserve it, her last reflections on what truly mattered. Camilla pushed back, insisting that the monarchy couldn't afford to become a museum of grief. That modernization meant moving forward, not clinging to the past. But Sophie's stance never wavered. And as the exchange escalated, voices rose not to shouts, but to sharp, controlled intensity. Staff outside the door later admitted they had never heard Sophie speak with such force. There was no compromise reached that day, no signatures, no resolution. But something far more important happened. Sophie issued a warning. She made it clear that she would not remain silent, and that if necessary, she would go public with what the Queen had privately entrusted to her. Camilla, unaccustomed to such resistance from within the family, said nothing in return, but her silence was telling. The balance of power had shifted not with scandal, but with quiet, undeniable force. Sophie left the meeting knowing she had drawn the line. And though the decision still hung in the air, the momentum had changed. It was no longer a quiet project to be pushed forward with little notice. It was now a royal standoff, one that neither woman could afford to lose. But it wasn't just words Sophie used to halt the plan. She had something far more powerful in her corner. Camilla may hold the title, but the Queen's former staff hold the memories. When they learned of the planned renovation, something unthinkable happened. They refused to move, loyal to Elizabeth, protective of Sophie, and willing to risk their jobs to keep one promise. No one issued commands, no meetings were called. But as whispers of Camilla's intentions reached the ears of those who had served Queen Elizabeth the longest, a silent resistance began to form. These weren't palace outsiders or fringe figures, they were the ones who had stood beside the Queen through decades of upheaval, scandal, and personal loss. They had tended to her private space with reverence. They had memorized its scent, its silence, its stories. And now they were being asked to dismantle it in the name of modernization. For them, it wasn't just an affront, it was betrayal. Permits for the renovation began to stall mysteriously. Maintenance reports were lost. Approvals sat in inboxes for days. No one admitted anything. Yet somehow, nothing moved forward. When archival teams were instructed to begin cataloguing and boxing up the contents of the room, they slowed the process to a crawl. Officially, they cited procedural delays, mislabeling, and technical issues. But unofficially, they were buying time. They had heard what Sophie had tried to stop, and though she held no formal authority, she held something stronger, quiet, moral power, the kind of influence that doesn't need to be spoken to be followed. Rumours began to swirl among the staff. One in particular took hold, that a sealed letter from Queen Elizabeth herself had been left in the room addressed to no one, but meant for whoever dared change it. Whether it truly existed or not didn't matter. Its possibility was enough to paralyze the renovation. No one wanted to be the person who opened a drawer and found words meant to shame them. It became sacred folklore within Windsor's walls, and it worked. Then came Sophie's unannounced visit. She didn't bring press. She didn't inform Charles. She simply arrived, walked the corridors she once knew by heart, and entered the room as if it were still hers to protect. Her presence sent a ripple through the castle. She stayed longer than expected, speaking to no one on her way out. But what followed was unmistakable. Even more hesitation. No boxes moved, no wallpaper removed, no blueprints taped to walls. Just the eerie calm of quiet rebellion. Camilla, by now informed of the delays, was livid, but she couldn't act swiftly, not without backlash. Firing long-serving staff en masse would look ruthless, especially if it was perceived as retaliation over a deeply personal legacy. She was trapped in a PR dilemma. Every move had consequences. Every consequence came with risk. And so, for the first time, her authority met a wall, not in scandal, not in politics, but in memory. But even with the staff's loyalty and Sophie's passion, Camilla wasn't backing down until a hidden clause changed everything. It was supposed to be empty, but deep in the Queen's writing desk was a single letter, sealed, undated, and addressed only to those who will inherit. What it said turned a private conflict into a royal reckoning. When the palace tensions reached their peak, a final courtesy was granted. Sophie would be allowed to visit the Queen's private room once more, before renovations began. It was framed as a gesture of closure, a chance to say goodbye, but what no one expected was that the room itself had one last secret to give. As Sophie sifted through the drawers of the Queen's writing desk, her fingers caught a faint edge behind a panel at the back. A click, a whisper of movement, and then, there it was. A hidden compartment, long sealed. Inside, a single envelope, cream-coloured, simple, unmarked, except for the words handwritten in firm, unmistakable script, to those who will inherit. The air shifted. Sophie, overwhelmed, held it for several moments before opening it. The contents were brief, just 2 paragraphs, but each word carried the weight of a legacy. In the letter, Queen Elizabeth didn't give commands. She gave clarity. She explained that the room was created not to be redesigned or reimagined, but to remain untouched as a place of remembrance for herself, for Philip, and for those who would one day understand the power of stillness in a world obsessed with change. She wrote of grief, reflection, and memory. She called it a space for remembering, not remodeling. And in that single sentence, she offered Sophie not just validation, but ammunition. Sophie didn't shout. She didn't leak. She acted precisely, strategically. The letter was immediately handed to the Lord Chamberlain, the highest officer of the royal household, who was known to be both loyal and wary of scandal. Its authenticity was examined quietly and confirmed. The handwriting, the phrasing, the wax seal, all irrefutable. This wasn't a forgery. It was a final word from the Queen herself. And suddenly, the entire equation changed. The palace, now caught in a maelstrom of escalating tension, couldn't ignore it. What had once been dismissed as emotional objection was now grounded in documented royal intent. The letter was escalated to King Charles, delivered without commentary, but loaded with implication. He read it in silence, and in that moment, everything shifted. The renovation was no longer a matter of design. It had become a matter of respect, of honor, of legacy. Publicly, he said nothing. Privately, however, the tone of conversation changed overnight. Camilla was informed. The plans were halted, and quietly, Sophie, without fanfare or force, had reshaped the course of palace history with a single discovery. What happened next was swift, unexpected, and revealed the quiet power Sophie had built behind the scenes. In a rare moment of royal reversal, King Charles stepped in, not for his wife, but for his mother. With quiet authority, he halted Camilla's plans. Behind the scenes, this wasn't compromise, it was damage control. When the Queen's letter surfaced, it forced a reckoning Charles had long hoped to avoid. He had supported Camilla's vision for a modern monarchy, believed in the optics of progress, and had approved changes across the palaces with minimal hesitation. But this was different. This wasn't just any room. It was a written wish from the monarch he had succeeded, the mother whose shadow still loomed over every decision, every room, every throne. The message was impossible to ignore. And to disregard it would not only seem callous, it would risk public scandal if ever revealed. So Charles made a decision that rippled through the corridors of Windsor with silent finality. He deemed the letter emotionally binding, a phrase carefully chosen to maintain plausible deniability while signaling unambiguous authority. The renovation was called off. Officially, it was paused for further review. Unofficially, it was buried. Camilla, who had fought for months to see her plans approved, was said to be livid. But she had no avenue for retaliation. The Queen's letter, now verified and locked away under royal archival authority, had sealed the room's fate. Any protest would appear disrespectful, not just to the late monarch, but to the throne itself. In this house, optics matter more than victory, and Camilla had no choice but to retreat. Within days, internal staff were informed. The Queen's private room would remain intact, indefinitely. The design team was redirected to a different suite of rooms, an alternative vision space Charles offered as a compromise to pacify Camilla's circle. It was a clear concession, cloaked in diplomacy. But everyone in the know understood what had just happened. Charles had taken a stand not for a legacy of modernization, but for a memory. And that meant something. What's more, Sophie's role in the reversal became known not publicly, but within royal inner circles. Her discovery of the letter, her private confrontation, her refusal to remain passive. It wasn't praised in official statements, but it didn't need to be. In royal circles, silence is often the loudest form of recognition. Invitations she once quietly received now carried more weight. Her presence was noted more closely, and while Camilla's influence remained dominant, Sophie had carved out something rare, unspoken, unshakable moral authority, not born of status, but earned through loyalty. Sophie didn't speak to the press. She didn't give interviews or write memoirs. She didn't need to, because in this one act, she did more than save a room. She redefined her place in a family that had long kept her at the edges. But while Sophie remained silent in public, her next move spoke louder than any interview or headline. Sophie didn't grant interviews. She didn't post cryptic messages. Instead, she returned to the Queen's favorite room and left one object on the writing desk. It was never photographed, but for those who knew, it said everything. The room stood still in its silence. No renovation tools, no stripped walls, no echoes of change. And into that stillness, Sophie walked alone. She didn't alert the press. She didn't even tell Charles. But the staff, those who had watched her protect the room, defend its history, and carry the Queen's memory like a second skin they knew she would return. She brought nothing with her but one small item, a framed photograph. Simple, personal. Just the two of them, Sophie and the Queen, seated together inside that very room, years before. It was the Queen's favourite from her final year. A moment that captured not ceremony, but closeness. One woman nearing the twilight of a reign, the other quietly rising as its most loyal witness. Sophie placed the frame gently on the writing desk, exactly where Camilla's renovation blueprints had once been spread, where mock designs had once imagined replacing grief with gloss. She didn't rearrange anything else. She didn't leave a note, because this act wasn't about spectacle. It was about presence, legacy. It was a final tribute, not shouted through headlines, but whispered through placement, a symbolic restoration of what nearly slipped away. The staff noticed. Of course they did. Some wept. Others simply nodded, as if affirming a silent pact that had finally been honored. That photo remained untouched. No one dared move it. It became a quiet monument, respected not through plaques or velvet ropes, but through reverence. Visitors never saw it. Journalists never reported it. But within the palace, it became a signal, a declaration. The room had been claimed not by title, not by power, but by love. To this day, the room remains unchanged. It's not open to the public. It doesn't appear in official palace tours or glossy books about royal interiors, but it's there frozen in meaning, protected by memory. And notably, Camilla has never returned to it. Some say she avoids it out of principle. Others whisper it, unsettles her. Perhaps because she lost that battle, or perhaps because it's the one room in Windsor Castle she can't control. Sophie never spoke about it. She didn't need to. Her silence became the loudest response. In a palace where so much is orchestrated, her gesture remained unstageable, unspinnable. And in doing so, she gave the Queen's memory a fortress far stronger than stone. And while the palace moved on, something had shifted beneath the surface, setting the stage for a future confrontation far more public than this one. Sophie protected the past. Camilla tried to shape the future, and Charles stood somewhere in between. But in this quiet war of memory versus modernity, the royal family has been left with a question they can no longer ignore. 2. Who truly gets to define the legacy of the Queen? The photo on the writing desk remained untouched, its quiet presence casting a long shadow through Windsor's most guarded corridors. It became more than a tribute, it became a symbol. And as word of Sophie's silent act spread internally, so too did something far more consequential, a groundswell of quiet support. Staff, advisors, and even distant royals began to see her not as the Countess of Wessex, but as a new kind of royal voice, one shaped not by title, but by integrity. It wasn't a campaign, it wasn't loud, but something had shifted, and the monarchy, so obsessed with continuity, was beginning to feel the friction of legacy against change. Camilla, once resolute in her vision to modernize Windsor, reportedly began stepping back from design and ceremonial decisions concerning spaces linked to Elizabeth. Sources close to the palace say she now treads more carefully, wary of sparking another internal revolt. Because what happened with that single room was no longer an isolated clash. It was the first domino in a line of unresolved questions. Royal watchers and insiders began to speculate. Were there other private rooms? Other sanctuaries Elizabeth had guarded? And more dangerously, what else had she left behind? If one sealed letter had the power to override the Queen Consort, what might others contain? Charles, caught between the woman he married and the mother who shaped him, reportedly began a quiet review of Windsor's interiors. Some suggest he has ordered discreet checks for additional personal documents Elizabeth may have left behind. Others believe he's begun rethinking how the Queen's legacy is portrayed in official materials. Regardless, one thing is clear: Sophie's intervention has sparked a reassessment within the firm's inner sanctum. And Sophie? Her influence has grown, not through press coverage or palace maneuvering, but through the one currency the royal family values most: loyalty. There are whispers now, speculation that her future role in the monarchy may evolve dramatically. With William and Catherine focused on modern diplomacy, and Harry and Meghan permanently distanced, Sophie's quiet, Unwavering devotion has become the monarchy's most stabilizing force in a time of emotional fragmentation. Because that's what this conflict revealed in the end, not just the fight over a room, but the fractures still echoing in a family reeling from the loss of its matriarch. The crown may pass, the walls may shift, but memory, true memory, can't be wallpapered over. Sophie reminded them of that, not with rebellion, but with reverence. One room, two women, a silent war that almost no one saw until now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.